So I stumbled across some anti-Semitic propaganda, and on Twitter. Where else do you go for your anti-Semitic propaganda? And this, because I came out as Jewish last week on the podcast. I was very, that was. Are you kidding me? Just because I'm Jewish? Okay, never mind. So I came out as Jewish on the podcast, so I thought I would follow that up with a little bit of assessment of the anti-Semitic propaganda landscape out there. And it's not just Twitter. This is a common misconception. People are also anti-Semitic off of Twitter, but here is the bit that I found on Twitter. This is a bit of anti-Semitic propaganda. And so I thought it would be good to kind of analyze a little bit, because it's interesting. Because anti-Semitism, they call it the socialist of fools, or the socialism of fools or something like that. It's like for people who want to look at the conspiracies of the world, but don't want to think about complicated forces and systems. They need things to be very clear-cut and cookie-cutter. So I think it's very interesting, and if you can dismantle some of it, that's more people to understand how power actually works in our world. So I looked at this and it says Holocaust and 6 million Jews stories in the Jew-owned New York Times, all long before World War II had finished. Okay, and I saw that and I'm like, hold on, slow down a second. First of all, what is expect the world? Is that the New York Times slogan? So I had to look that up, and expect the world was the New York Times' slogan in like the 90s for a period of time. So that explains that. I was just at first, I'm like, what am I looking at? The different fonts? It's a very deep fried anti-Semitic meme, right? I'm like, okay, this is a different font that someone put on top of it. Okay, but okay, whatever. If let's get to the point here, right? The point is that the New York Times and Jew-owned, it's not false, but it's a little bit like, okay, is that a fair criticism, or what does that really mean? What conclusions are we drawing? But okay, the point is, let's get to the point. Holocaust and 6 million Jews stories in the New York Times, all long before World War II had finished. So you're reading that and you're like, okay, so the assumption is that if the New York Times is mentioning the words Holocaust or 6 million Jews before World War II had finished, then that means that those ideas were made up and sort of applied to what happened in World War II in Europe. And then you start looking at these articles and you're like, wait, a lot of them are before World War II had started. A lot of them are before World War I had started, a few of them. So it's like, okay, well, it's kind of confusingly phrased. And then it's also like, but wait, why is there this assumption that there was no awareness of the words Holocaust or 6 million Jews until World War II had finished? Do you see what's being assumed by that assumption? That assumption is saying that we didn't know. It's saying, oh, it would be so crazy and wild, and it would reveal the conspiracy for these things to be mentioned before the war had finished, because of course people didn't know. People did know. Now, did they know exactly how many Jews were being killed? No, obviously. But could they have maybe made some judgments about that? Was the word Holocaust ever used before this? Okay, because it seems like this is making the assumption the word Holocaust was never used prior. So, okay. So let's dig into some of this stuff. You look at this, and if it gives you the confirmation that your bias is looking for, maybe you don't look much closer, and you say, oh, I had a Jewish teacher one time, and she was really mean, so yeah, this must be true, and so on. But let's start with let's start with the earliest ones, okay? This is hard to read, so I'm going to read it. There are 6 million living, bleeding, suffering arguments in favor of Zionism, this quote says, in 1900, referring to this will become clear later, but I believe they are referring to Jews in the Soviet Union. Here it says, we say it is steeped to the eyes of the guilt of this Holocaust. This is referring to an event in 1903. So that's supposed to be strange that they used the word Holocaust in 1903. We're supposed to find that strange. In 1903, we have the word Holocaust being used, okay? And we're supposed to find that strange, I guess. I guess I should just look up the word Holocaust etymology, just to kind of have that as a reference. Britannica. Let's see. The word Holocaust derived from a Greek. Okay, this is actually less helpful. Oh, wait, hold on. The same word used to denote the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem and the destruction of the second temple by the Romans. So it's been used for a while. I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. This is the word Herban, which means destruction. Shoah, biblical Hebrew word meaning catastrophe, was used. Okay, this is not as helpful as I thought, because I'm wondering, like, first usages. Hold on. First usages, etymology. Original. Okay, maybe this etymology online website is better. The Holocaust, Nazi genocide of European Jews. The word itself was used in English in reference to Hitler's Jewish policies from 1942, but not as a proper name for them. Right, because it wasn't a proper name. One important, interesting thing I was taking away from looking at this is I actually think it's really fucked up for the word Holocaust to only be used for the killing of Jews. And as a Jewish person, you kind of grow up like with that perspective a little bit of like the Holocaust is the genocide against us, and nothing else is a Holocaust. There might be other genocides and murders, there's this and that, but we're the Holocaust. And I think it's really bad because it blinds us to equally bad genocides. I don't think there should be a word like the Holocaust can be used for other things. It doesn't have to be a proper noun. It can be a regular noun that, as it was prior to the Holocaust of Jews. And I think that's important so we can keep our eyes open and understand that genocide doesn't have to be gas chambers. You know what I mean? So, anyways, let's get back to here. So the word Holocaust has been used. 1905, he declared that a free and happy Russia with its 6 million Jews. So again, 6 million Jews was apparently the estimation of Jews in Russia. A free and happy Russia would possibly mean the end of Zionism. Right. Right. Starting reports of the condition and future of of Russia's 6 million Jews were made. So a lot of these are references to the estimation of the number of Jews in Russia. 6 million souls will need to help resume normal life when war is ended. So almost all of them, right? 6 million Jews in Russia. So it's supposed to be interesting to us that there were estimations of 6 million Jews in Russia. And then the word Holocaust was used. And so apparently it was like an estimate of the number of Jews in Russia or in Europe. The rising tide of anti-Semitism in Europe today, which has deprived more than 6 million Jews and non-Aryans of a birthright, may some 6 million Jews. Okay, so we've taken a little bit of a look at this, okay? I found this website called holocaustcontroversies.blogspot.com, which honestly seems like a really cool website that like chronicles different controversies and anti-Semitic misinformation and genocide denying misinformation in general. Hold on. So this is like this is someone posting it. Which Holocaust is your favorite? So someone just wrote that without really thinking, oh, like so much of what I'm sharing is just different versions of the word Holocaust being used. So why does that mean that, like, why does the word Holocaust being used in other contexts speak to the nature of what happened under Hitler? Which is to say, the short debunking is there's no historical or logical connection between various uses of Holocaust and 6 million and the historicity of the Holocaust, or that the recognized Jewish death toll of between 5 and 6 million Jews. So the meme is simply irrelevant and is a result of cherry picking among other numbers published at the time. The whole argument is incoherent if it's the established death toll is based on demographic data, which is not dependent on what can or cannot be found in the newspapers. And then they show that you can search for 5 million and find a bunch of things, or 3 million and find a bunch of things. This led me to looking a bit deeper. I'm just, and I found some research, some interviews. So this is a video about how the New York Times and the American public managed to ignore the Holocaust. But wait a second. That's not what I thought that the Jew-owned New York Times was like trying to make everything into a Holocaust and trying to imprint this idea of a Holocaust onto the public. They weren't ignoring the Holocaust. They were trying to make us think only about the Holocaust, right?
That was something that was very much...
I'm going to need volume.
That was something that was very much on the mind of American Jews.
Arthur Hayes Sulzberger was very plugged into that world.
That's the Jewish man who owned the New York Times.
The anti-Semites, frankly, at the State Department were downplaying the reports that were coming out of Europe that Jews were being singled out and Jews were being systematically murdered. Arthur Hayes Sulzberger chose to believe those reports rather than the other ones that said, no, this is happening.
Did you hear that?
And I think there's no question that it was skewed by his desire not to put the New York Times in a situation where it would be considered a special pleader for Jews.
So it's actually the opposite of what the anti-Semitic meme was saying. Interesting. Let's look at another example or another interesting bit about this. This is actually about New York Times articles, even more specifically, from someone who studied it.
The New York Times.
This video is called Burying the Holocaust in the Pages of the New York Times.
So I think hopefully that will give you some feel for what the stories were like. Certainly as you get into 1944 and into 1945, what the stories begin to read like is, there had already been confirmation that 5 million to 6 million Jews had been killed.
Oh, really? By 1944 or 1945. Wow. But I thought people had to count it up. I mean, how did they do all that counting?
And then
because I thought it was impossible for anyone to know any of this. And
soldiers and the reporters who were with them get to different countries, different towns, different cities.
It's so interesting that the Holocaust denying misinformation has this assumption that no one knew about the Holocaust while it was happening. I guess they need that assumption if they don't think the Holocaust actually happened. They need to have the assumption that no one really knew about it at the time, right? But because people actually did know about it, it blows up their spot. Because it shows that actually people were kind of keeping track and, in fact, ignoring, to a large extent, even the Jew-owned New York Times.
That are now completely empty of Jews, and that's the coverage of it. But what I want to do now, and so we're going to, I'm going to stop my screen sharing. Okay, is try and sort of say what this means, right? So if you have all of these stories, what does it mean about what Americans do and what Americans understood? And I think it's fair to say that if you read the New York Times very carefully, you would have had a pretty good idea what was happening to the Jews in Europe as it was happening. Now, I notice I said incredibly carefully because, as I've mentioned, I found 1,186 stories, although I have to say since then, since I did the counting for the book, I found a few others, again, showing you how hard it is to find all of the stories. So it's probably actually closer to 1,200. But,
that's a lot of stories. But I wouldn't say it's too many. You know what I mean? And let's hear about how they were shared, how prominently they were shared in the paper of record.
They're there. If you were reading the Times with that in mind, you probably could have figured it out. And as I would say, I think most of the stories are fairly timely, fairly detailed, and accurate. But again, almost all the stories were inside the newspaper. There were only 26 stories on the front page out of 2,400 front page stories.
Wow.
And of those 26, only 6 of them described on the front page the Jews as the primary victims.
Wow.
Oftentimes on the front page, they'll be grouped with other people who are suffering. And then only on the inside of the paper and that part of the story will it be clear that the Jews are being singled out.
And obviously other people were being targeted, but I could see how in certain stories it's worth pointing out specific actions were specifically taken towards the Jews.
Similarly, there was never a lead. It was never a lead story. Even the liberation of the concentration camps in 1945, not the lead story, not the most important story of the day.
Wow. Now let's just fast forward to one other segment I wanted to show.
As if the reporters who are writing them or the editors that are editing them doubt the believability of the stories. And let me give you just...
I believe let's get that sentence.
And I think there's truth to that. I mean, I think we all still struggle with those kind of existential questions. How could it happen? But if you read the actual stories, they don't sound as if the reporters who are writing them or the editors that are editing them doubt the believability of the story.
Right. That's an important point. It's not that they didn't believe it. It's that they were not highlighting it nearly like they were doing the opposite of what anti-Semitic memes like this say. They were actually downplaying the genocide of Jews.
And let me give you just 2 quick examples. Both of these come from the period in 1944 after the Germans have moved into Hungary. Hungary is the last intact Jewish community in Europe. The Germans decide because they can't and aren't winning the war against the Allies, they can at least win the war against the Jews. And so they decide to start deporting the Hungarian Jews. There are about 800,000 of them immediately to be gassed immediately in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And this first story on this appears in the New York Times on May 10th, 1944. And I'm going to read you just the lead of this story. Although it may sound unbelievable, it is a fact that Hungary, where Jewish citizens were comparatively well treated until March 19, is now preparing for the annihilation of Hungarian Jews by the most fiendish methods. The puppet Nazi government is completing plans and about to start the extermination of about 1 million human beings. The story then goes on to say they are to meet the same fate as more than 5 million Jews who have been, in quotes, put to death in one form or another by the Germans, including in gas chamber baths. And that story appeared on page 5.
Page 5. And a little bit more about this. Where does the figure of 6 million victims come from? First mentioned by Dr. Wilhelm Hotel, an Austrian-born official in the Third Reich and a trained historian who served in a number of senior positions in the SS, testified for the prosecution in the Nuremberg trials. Described conversation he had with Eichmann, the SS official who had principal responsibility for the Jewish genocide logistics. In 1944, in a 1961 testimony, he said Eichmann told him that about 6 million Jews had died. Holocaust, lot of agreement that it was, a fairly well understood number of European Jews. And And I guess I found another. Yeah, there was like people just make different versions of the meme. Like, this is just a different version of it, and they learned how to hyphenate Jew-owned in this one. But it's also like since 1869 as well, which as if that's supposed to prove more, and it also doesn't go to World War II because this one's just trying to show that that 6 million and that Holocaust was mentioned, but it's also not readable. Like, anyways, just wanted to make sure people understood where I stand on anti-genocide propaganda, is that I'm against it. I actually think that genocide is bad, and we should talk more about how it's bad, and rather than downplaying it. But I also just find it really interesting, these memes, anti-Semitic memes that people can't really critically think their way out of. Apparently we got a real critical thinking problem that we need to do something about. So that's my opinion on that. This is a podcast